Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 214 of NoCoders Office Hours. I'm Tanya, your host, and I'm here with our member Thomas and my new NoCoder Sam Morgan, who's going to lead this evening's office hours. We should have some more people joining us shortly. But before we get started, I just want to let you know a little bit about what office hours is. 6 times per week, we invite our developer members to come on to our Zoom, and we answer any questions they want about Bubble. They're allowed to ask us anything they want, and we can't promise that we have the answers, but we do promise you won't suffer alone with your question, because we do know it gets lonely. You're behind that computer screen all day, you're trying to make Bubble work, and sometimes you just need someone else to help you along, and that's what we're here for. If you would like to join us and ask us your Bubble questions, please go to pronocoders.com and sign up today. And you'll come into our Slack community and have access to the vault, all sorts of things. So do join us at pronocoders.com. Sam, welcome. It's nice to meet you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Awesome. Do you want to tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your background with Bubble?
Sure. So my name is Sam Morgan. I started in the music industry as a music school owner and discovered Bubble back in 2020 during the pandemic. Started using it to build a music school management app for my business and got way into it. Eventually started working full-time as a coach, coaching clients on their Bubble apps, and ended up actually leaving my business and handing day-to-day control to a partner because I was so passionate about what I was doing. So here I am, full-time no code. This is my second phase career, but it's one that I'm super passionate about and just really excited to be involved in. So happy to be here.
Fantastic. We're happy to have you. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thomas, you said you had some general questions.
Yeah, so I've seen it around a few times, but regex, regular expressions.
Very cool. They're just kind of wondering what it is, or you have a specific question about a regex formula?
Yeah, just general, like just understanding where's like best use cases and all. So
sure, that's a really cool question. So regex stands for regular expression. It's a very common, I guess you could call it a language. And regex is mainly used for advanced find and replace actions, right? So it's great for certain things. Like, let's take a look at just an example here. If I'm just going to create a new page, let's see. Bubble has this built-in find and replace functionality, right? So if you have a bit of text here where you say, here is a bunch of text on the screen. Actually, I think this find and replace only works with dynamic text, right? So we can say current users first, last, and then you have a find and replace action, right? Now, this is really useful. I could take something like if, it was my first and last name, I could find Sam and replace it with Samuel. But there's often a lot of times when you can see this checkbox up here, use a regex pattern. Sometimes this text defined is not as obvious and not as clear cut. And so for examples like that, you want to use a regex pattern. Now, in terms of like learning regex and actually getting good at it, to be honest with you, like I use regexer.com constantly, and it's a lot of guess and check. So let me just show you what I mean by that. I don't know if that's the right site. Let's see. Here it is, regexr.com. Now this site is super, super useful because you can essentially Google and test out regex patterns. You could spend as much time as you want actually learning how to compose these patterns, but I honestly, I don't think that's good time spent. You're not going to be using this often enough to actually need to know how to construct these patterns from scratch. A lot of times what I'll do is like a really good example of regex is if you want to find, let's say, an example of, find any text between two words, right? That's something that can be pretty difficult to pull off here without a regex pattern. When you're saying text defined, there's really no way in Bubble to say any text between this word and this word. That's what we would use regex for. So with that, usually my process is just to Google the like plain language version of what I'm looking for. So what I'll say is like regex expression for finding a string between two words. Sounds really elementary, but generally you're going to get some sort of Stack Overflow where they're going to tell you exactly what regex expression to try. And then you can use this regexer website to kind of test those out and validate what you have. So just looking in here, this doesn't look like a very reliable one. And if anyone has it, Tanya, I'm going to ask you this too. I'm sort of new to PC. I don't know what it is that my Google Chrome keeps reverting to Yahoo. Every time I switch it to Google, it keeps turning back to Yahoo. So if anyone has any tips for that, I would.
Oh, you're on a PC?
I am on a PC, yes.
Okay. I forget. I'm on a
It's like
Chromebook.
every time I come in here to settings and I switch it, like my PC really, really wants me to use Yahoo, and it's driving me insane.
That's crazy.
Anyway.
I would assume your PC would want you to use Bing.
I know. I don't know exactly what. Okay, so let's take a look. So here's two expressions here that we can kind of try out, right? This star, I can tell you in regex, is the expression for everything. And so it looks like it's saying, you know, backslash and then our starting word, and then select everything between that and whatever the ending word is here. So let's test out a couple different things. I'm going to grab this.
We have a use case for you, actually, because Ben, weren't we talking about doing this earlier? Like when you want to extract the Instagram handle?
Yeah, so a way to extract a username from Instagram. So it would be normally like instagram.com/the username.
Sure. That
just-
could be that I probably wouldn't use regex for, because you're always going to know. So that's an example of something where you have a static find and replace, right? Like the thing that you're looking to find is always going to be the same, and it's not dynamic in length or in value. Meaning if you're looking for an Instagram profile, like the link to my Instagram profile is instagram.com/samsoiheard. So what you want to end up doing is just finding and replacing instagram.com/ with nothing. And then you'll pull out the handle just by doing that. So I think that's actually an easier use case for here. Like, let's say you had a field on user. I don't know if we have it, but we have Instagram link as a text. And over here, if we don't need an actual use case, but if we had the current user's Instagram link, and then we could just find and replace the HTTPS backslash. Oops, I hate when that happens.
Me too.
And then just find and replace that with nothing. Now, I guess you want to account for the situation, like if you have a variability situation where maybe people aren't always entering this link the exact same way. So, for example, like when people enter their information, they might enter the full link. So it might look like this, or they might just enter without the HTTPS, or they might just enter this, right? So there could be a lot of different use cases. Again, this is one where I don't know that regex is the best use for it. I'd probably just end up using conditionals for this, where you have, you know, if, so just as an example, this is kind of the default here, right? Where we assume they type the whole thing. So then you could say when the current user's Instagram link, and then just I would base it on contain. So when it doesn't contain HTTP, then you know, you could do a different find and replace, and so on and so forth. So regex would be more for like, regex I find really useful for when you're looking to find and replace something that's of, like, it could be a number of different things, completely variable length. This is more like one of three options, so I wouldn't necessarily mess with regex. If we wanted to, we still could, like, just to go over regex, because that was the question, we could still, what I'd probably do here is find instagram.com / and select everything before it. So that would basically include the www, the HTTPS, or any of these, right? So again, with that technique we were talking about before, I could come in here and say regex expression for selecting everything, including, what I should say is everything before and including a string. Here we go. Regular expression to select everything before and up to. Let's see. This matches everything up to .txt without including it. We want something that's going to actually include it. Let's try this. Come back in here. So let's take this is why I like this site, because you can put in like an actual use case and see if you can select the right thing. So here I'm going to say Instagram.com/ there we go. So see how it selects everything up until and including the slash, right?
Yeah.
So I could use this regex expression now to, back in here, current user's Instagram link, find and replace. We would use a regex pattern. So that would be the regex pattern. So it's going to select that and we're going to replace it with nothing. So that's probably the cleanest way to do it, including regex, which will account for all of the use cases of HTTPS, www, whatever you end up using here.
Yeah, I think that's more elegant than the conditionals.
Awesome.
Probably, yeah. I tend, to be honest, personally, I get really frustrated with regex because every now and then it can be somewhat tricky to track down the exact expression that you're looking for.
Yes. Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions about that?
Did that answer your question, Thomas?
Yep.
Yep. Very cool.
Cool. This site is very fun to play around with. And you also, don't let me steer you away from like trying to learn the language, because I suppose it's a cool skill to have. There's a lot of learning resources here. So you can have references of classes and what they do. There's a lot of different things that you can do with regex, and you can use this to test your skills in terms of what you're actually able to select.
I agree with you, though. I think save your brain power. Like, look up the patterns that you need.
Definitely.
This is definitely cool, though. This is free.
What's that?
Is this
Yep,
free?
it's free.
Oh yeah. This site is totally free.
Cool.
Regex is a very popular, it's used. So if you think about traditional coding, there is no bubble find and replace action. The regex is find and replace.
Right.
So when it comes to incorporating this into JavaScript, it's a language that was built to exist on top of those coding languages so that you could perform find and replace type actions within your lines of code. Bubble came in and gave us this really awesome find and replace action where you don't need to know any regex, but they still give you the ability to add that in, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure.
That's cool.
Other questions, things to talk about? Who's got other burning issues?
Ben, you got anything for us this evening?
I'd have to go through and have a look. There's a few I'd love to discuss kind of best practices around a couple of things,
Sure.
or one in particular. I might share my screen so you can have a look.
Sure.
So I'm creating what would essentially be, so a brand will connect with talent or someone else, and then the brand will send them an order form, which will, be an order form of some description. How would you create an order pop-up? Would you do it when button is pressed, then create an entry in the database that is the order form with the order number and everything, and then send that details to the user? Or is there a cleaner way to do it?
Great question. It really depends on what you're looking to capture. So a couple things. Number one, I would only create the record right away if you're looking to capture unsaved data. Meaning if it's important to you that when a user clicks away from this screen, or let's say their computer crashes in the middle of filling out this form, or they just choose to cancel out and press the X button and say, I'm not going to make this. If you are concerned or care about that data being saved and available, then I would create the record right away.
Okay.
If you can at all get away with not caring about that, I find it to be way easier not to deal with like potential cases of empty records in the database and things like that. And so in that scenario, I would much prefer to create the record when you click the submit order button from within the pop-up. And so it's really just a question of, on your platform, is that okay? Obviously, if you put the workflow on the submit order button, the record's not created or even touched at all until they press that button. So you do have the potential for, potentially lost data. A lot of people though would think about it like, if someone navigates away from the screen or they, don't finish the process, then they weren't looking to create that data in the first place. And so I don't care if it gets lost, right? So those would be kind of the two case scenarios. And then I would definitely use, like, just in terms of further best practices, just using the same pop-up for editing. And so have kind of like a mode custom state where you can either create the new order booking and then also edit in the same pop-up.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I actually have a question around that as well.
Sure.
If you give a sec. So what I created is I realized that I actually hate pop-ups. I don't like the way they look. There's a lot of things I don't like about them. So I've converted everything to being slide outs.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
But if someone owns this brand and they want to edit it, how to bring in the information here, which I can do, but also if they're not editing it, keeping these taglines. So for example, we go floating group edit here, and then a brand. That's the first screen.
Okay.
So how would, obviously, when I click edit, you would say display data in here. Yeah.
Right.
Is that,
Yep.
And
that's
then
exactly right.
How would you do this where the initial content is brand name unless you do initial content, but the placeholder's brand name? Is that correct?
So yeah, so if you
parent
put
group.
initial content and there's no data in that initial content, then it will revert to the placeholder.
Gotcha. So you just do it exactly like that.
Yep. And then you also have just a cool opportunity. One of my favorite features in Bubble that I think people don't use enough. You can use, there's an expression if you click so in your initial content, if you click like back in on brand name and then click more, there's an expression called defaulting to that I really, really like. Let's see if it's available here. There we go. So what defaulting to does is it says, if the expression before defaulting to is empty, you can set another option, like it'll revert back to this content. So in other words, if you were, maybe you always wanted it populated with like a default brand name or something like that. I'm just showing you this because it's a really cool expression that's super useful everywhere. It may not be the perfect use case for it here in this form, but it's very, very handy for like setting those kind of, if this data is empty, do something else.
Gotcha. Okay.
But yeah, that's the general idea. When you click edit, you would display data in there and then just make sure that the initial content for all of those fields are set to the correct field in the database.
Okay, cool. All right, I'll do that.
And then, like I said, if you want it to revert to the placeholder brand name, which is probably the right flow here, then don't worry about that defaulting to expression.
Yeah, so just do it like this.
Exactly.
Interesting. Cool. Do you have any sorry, Thomas, do you have anything?
You can go ahead.
Okay. Just I mean, it's just a quick one. You either will or won't. But this brand type here, I am really trying to get it centered. So it's centered here, which is awesome. But these aren't. Do you know any way to center these as well?
Oh, interesting. Is that just a normal drop-down element?
Yeah. I mean, I don't hate this, and I'm totally fine with it. I just thought I'd ask if
I don't think, Tanya, unless you have an idea, I don't think, not without custom CSS. So there's definitely a way that you could target that with, some CSS and an HTML element. Do you know anything about CSS or how to kind of find the right selectors for that?
Well, this is actually already has a HTML element on it with some CSS. because otherwise you can't center the initial text in the
Got
drop
it.
down like this.
Right.
But I thought there might be a way to center the whole thing.
No, so what you would want to do for the options is if you go back to that HTML element that you had in there,
Yep.
There's most likely a different selector for the options that already exists. Now, you're not going to be able to, so I'm assuming center dropdown is a custom ID that you assigned that dropdown, right?
It is, correct.
So do you mind if I take over the share for a second just to show you
please.
kind of what I'm talking about?
Yep.
So if I go back here, if we preview, like, let's see if we can actually just get this to work, because I'm actually curious about this. So if we put a drop down in here and I put like choice 1, I'm just going to do static, choice 2, choice 3, and let's do 4. And then we'll kind of do the same thing you did, which is we'll give this an ID attribute of custom drop down element. And then I'll be able to put in my HTML, which will say style, and we'll say custom drop down element, and we'll say text align center. I like to use these important tags. It basically just overrides, like, if there's any other CSS code in the site telling it to do something different, it says, hey, this one is more important and prioritize this. So that is the basics of what you had. I think you were using text align last, the code, but this should work the same way. Sonia, am I not seeing the runtime login and password for this?
Just the username password.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Oh, that's why I was seeing this as like default values for some reason. There we go. Okay. So this actually, you notice, did it all to the whole thing. So I think it was that part of your code was the text align last, I think. If you change it to this,
What did you have?
it looks like it'll do the whole thing. So basically just change your middle code to text align, colon. Here, I'll even paste this bit in the chat so you can just copy and paste.
Awesome.
And that should, it looks like, at least based on here, center the whole thing. But what I was getting at is if it didn't, what you can actually do is in Google Chrome, if I right click the page, and it's actually, you notice I can't do it with the thing open, so that's kind of problematic. But if you right click the page and click inspect, a lot of times you can kind of get, let's see, let's turn this back to responsive and make it a bit bigger. There we go. So you'll be able to kind of see what the different CSS classes that are already pre-assigned may be. And sometimes you get lucky and other times you don't. So as I click through, you notice it kind of highlights on the page. So there we go, like div, bubble, R box, bubble element, space, drop down. So that's a class, and here's the ID. So when you see a class like this, like if we didn't want to give it a custom ID and I wanted to do this to all drop downs, I could take this code that I'm just doing there. This is something that Bubble actually, gave it. And if you look at it, it says select, and then you have the custom thing that we gave it. It says hashtag custom dropdown element, and then dot bubble hyphen element dot dropdown. So if we didn't give it this custom ID, you can actually target stuff just through that. So I should be able to just say dot bubble element dot with a capital D dropdown. And that's using not the custom one, but that's just going to apply to all bubble dropdowns that happen. Let's see if this works.
Can you, is it possible for you to show me what you entered in that to make it centered? Because mine is now not centered at all after I've done that.
Yeah, go ahead and share your screen. Let me take a look at your code.
Okay, cool. All right.
Well, I also noticed when you were inspecting, it wasn't centered.
When I was inspecting in Chrome?
Yep.
Oh, interesting.
After you put it into the inspector and you clicked on the drop down, it wasn't centered anymore.
Interesting. Okay, let's see.
I don't know if it's because, oh no, that's just the name. That shouldn't matter.
Shouldn't matter. And that's not coming up as centered at all now.
No, not even the initial view is centered anymore.
Can you click on the element, like the actual brand type dropdown element in your?
Sure.
I just want to see. Yeah, down there, and then scroll down to the ID attribute. Center drop down. Can you just click to highlight that center drop down? Yep, just check it. So sometimes, just to share with you what I'm having you do. Every now and then I've had it where when you click that, you might sometimes see an extra space at the end of the word that can throw things off. So I was just double checking to make sure.
Been there, my friend.
Yeah. Okay, so that looks good. Go back to the HTML, click the code. Default, you have style, you have slash style. Header drop down, text align. That is certainly weird. Why would it be working on my demo but not in yours? Because we have the exact same code up there.
Are you using Chrome?
I am using Chrome. Yep.
Same. Yeah.
I'm curious if it's because the only variable I'm thinking of right now is that I was using static values in my dropdown, whereas you're using dynamic. But that shouldn't make a difference. I don't. That seems very strange to me that would make any difference. Let me see. I'm going to take the share back for a second.
Text dash align colon space center space important. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Are the spaces right?
Yeah, that's all correct. You can see here. That's all exactly the same. And if I come back here to my custom drop-down element, just to double check a couple other things. I don't remember if this makes a difference or not. Is your HTML and your drop-down element, do they have the same parent? Meaning they're either in a group together, or they both have the page as a parent, or do they have different parent elements?
So the parent group is for the HTML element is floating group create edit, and the parent group for the dropdown, is that which one you're asking?
Mm-hmm.
Is a different group.
It's a different group. So see if you can you put the HTML element inside the same group as the dropdown. Like let's have those have the same parent element. I'm curious if that makes a difference. It may or may not.
Good call.
Let's test this. Nope. Same thing. So
Same thing?
Yeah.
Let me test one thing out.
This is going to be one of those things that I just know it's going to be I've spelled something wrong or there's a space somewhere.
Well, it looks pretty good, and it shouldn't matter. Like there can be an extra space here, there can be spaces here. None of that should really matter too much. The cool thing about CSS is spacing actually isn't a huge deal. Man, it's super confusing why that's the same. One thing I'm curious about, I'm going to get rid of this whole code for a second. I want to get this back to left align. I'm curious about the just centering the drop down text like that. Did you try that?
No.
So like in the style, or if you don't have a style on the drop down, you should be able to just make it center.
That's how it is set now already.
And that's still not them. So yours are still showing up left align, right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. All right, let me see. Let's try to. Do we have access to your app on our end?
Yep.
Let me open it up. Is it the Click web app?
Yep, correct.
Perfect. Okay, and then what page was that on again?
App.
App. And then it was in the floating group.
Correct.
I just want to see it. Sometimes just being in here and looking at the element myself.
You sound like me.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Okay, and it was which floating group here? The create edit?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, man. There we go. Okay, floating group create edit, and then it was CE brands.
Yeah, created a brand.
And this is first one here. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a look here. Okay, it's a multi drop down. So there is number one. I don't know why I didn't notice that before. So my demo is not an exact demo because I'm using a standard drop down. So let's first, before we go any further, let's first test this out. I'm going to replace by another type, and we will turn this into a multi drop down. Okay. So with that, now I have choice 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me bring back in my code. And I remove that. So we'll say style, custom drop down element. And we'll say that the text align is center, and that's important. And we'll close off the style. All right. Okay. So not centered. There we go. Okay, so we found kind of the element. Oh, wait, nope, it does still have the right ID. Okay, let me inspect this. Make sure. So what's interesting is I'm noticing here, like I don't see in the inspector, I don't see my custom class anywhere.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. Because it should be there. We should see custom drop-down element, which is what I named it. Or I should say custom ID, not custom class. So it looks like there's an issue where the multi drop-down. Oh, here it is. Look up here. Custom, here we go. Custom drop-down element. So there it is. And I have text line center. Important. So what is overriding that up here? Position. Now you had in there before text align last, right? Was the code you had in there before. And that was working for the placeholder, but not the choices. Huh.
Yeah. So yeah, same.
But then when you select, they still go back to here, right?
Correct. And look, it's not a massive deal. I just thought, well, I had you, I may as well ask the question.
Yeah, that's interesting. It seems to me, Ben, like it's something to do with the multi-drop-down element. I'm very curious to dig into this more. This is the type of fun that I know it's like so minor and silly, but I just love these.
The puzzle. You can't put the puzzle down, Sam. I'm the same way.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's got to be a way to get. I mean, so just to wrap this up, Ben, my next approach would be to see if we could get this to work with one of the like default classes here, right? So to like try to pull in a select to selection, or like this class here. You see how when you hover, it kind of shows you like span dot select to hyphen selection dot to copy that whole phrase and try to target one of those for the centering, and basically just try as many different ones as I can until I find the right target. So that would be my approach. I'm fairly confident that that would work at some point. It's just a matter of how many you'd have to try to find the right one.
Yeah.
My approach would be a custom repeating group multi-select.
Yes, that's the other thing we didn't even get into, but yeah, generally this custom select, for multi drop downs, custom built options tend to provide you a lot more versatility, and you can usually build them out in a reusable here.
I would build it out in a prototype, and then Thomas would make it look pretty, right, Thomas?
There you go. That
Awesome.
was cool.
Thanks for that. That's fun, Sam.
Thank you.
What else do we have for this evening? Sam brought up before we hopped on, he was like, if nobody has any questions, can we build something fun? I said, yes, we can.
Always.
Always.
You guys have anything that you're curious about? Any just like random, like, oh, I wonder if that could be built on Bubble, or I wonder if this could have like. Otherwise, I could talk for hours about random stuff, but for me,
we should have had you on Sunday. We should have had you on Sunday. We all ran out of things to say on Sunday.
Oh, I was broken by the end of it.
We were like, we don't know what else to say.
Have you used the Chart.js plugin much, Sam?
Say it again. Which plugin?
Chart.js.
Yeah, a little bit. Not as much as some other people. I haven't built a ton of like data-driven apps that would need this, but I've seen it in a bunch of client apps and have decent experience with it. Do you have a specific question, or more just curious about the plugin?
Just curious about it. I mean, I've bought it. I don't know how it was so cheap with the one you just showed me, because it's like $140 when I bought it.
Well, that's one thing to look into. Let's see. Then search chart element, chart graph, Charts.js.
Oh, it was 100. Yeah, 191.
So
Looks
what
like
I have is this one. Yeah, this is not the same thing.
No,
that's not the same thing. Yeah, it's this one up here.
Specific use cases? No, look, I'm still probably got about 30 or 40 other things to work through before I kind of get to that one. But I just thought you might have had some sort of input on it, worth the money. Not
yeah, it's a cool plugin. So I'm over in your app because you mentioned that you got it. So obviously you get a lot more charts than the standard like Bubble charts plugin.
And they look so much better.
Yeah, they look a lot better, and you can also stack multiple lines of data. One thing I've noticed with them, do you have like a sandbox page here anywhere to just like drop an element on?
WIP, work in progress page.
Okay, yeah. So one thing I've noticed about all the Chart.js charts is, like, let's take a pie donut chart. They always separate out like the labels and the values, and you want them to be two lists. So like this is different from your standard. I don't know if you have the standard Bubble charts installed, but I'm not going to clutter up your app with it. But in the standard Bubble chart, it basically asks you to set a data type, and then set a field on that data type for the label and a field for the different values. And so it'll just look at one list of things and then automatically assign stuff. Whereas Charts.js, it's actually more flexible, but it can be more confusing at first, where they give you this like the data series values. You have a list of labels and a list of values, and they can be completely different things. And so you can actually get like reports across different data types and things like that. But what I always find important to remember when you're doing this is that the number of items in the labels and the values and the colors should all be the same, so that everything kind of matches up, because you want the first label to go with the first value, second label with the second value, and so on. So
okay.
These, obviously in the demo, they're in here as static values, but when you reference lists from the database, when you do a search for things like that, just make sure that what you're searching for is actually returning things that are the same, a list of the same number of items. And then these all need to be numbers, except for the labels can be strings or numbers, and then the values always have to be numbers. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward. They look a lot better. I think it's a really cool plugin that has a lot of versatility. In my experience, they're a bit trickier to navigate, but once you kind of get a little bit of experience, they're really cool. I worked with one client. The one I have the most experience with is this Candlestick Chart. Really cool for financial apps. It kind of shows like the positive and negative of a certain data point. So you get like that like short little line, which they call a candlestick. But really cool for like stock analysis and things like that.
Totally. I love the hover over feature as well, where you can gather different data points and view them with inside the chart. It's crazy powerful.
Yeah, for sure. It's something I'd love to like build an app myself that's really heavily focused on charts, because most of my experience with it is mainly working with other clients, but I haven't, but there's, you could, it's a whole specialty in and of itself just to be a beast with these types of charts. my math brain starts to get confused after a little while. But
I was just about to say that there's designing them, and then there's the formulas and analytics and all that kind of stuff, and that's where my mind breaks.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Thomas, do you have something?
If no one knows, I was going to ask, actually, funny thing, Sam.
Yes.
Excuse me, I'm chewing food.
That's okay.
Oh my gosh. Thomas,
I feel like I had to answer, you know what I mean? They call your name.
you're hungry today, Thomas.
I'm hungry every day, like all the time.
All the time.
I was gonna ask you, you said you like to build things. Was there anything that you had in mind building?
Hey, let's see. I'm trying to think of something that we could actually fit in and get value out of in the rest of the time that we have today. How about you guys? Go ahead.
Something we do, or at least I did quite a bit over the summer, was we would start something and then we would like do it in chunks. So spread it over different office hours. And then what we can do is Ben is taking notes on office hours, and so we can tie them all together.
Okay, cool. So I'll let you guys choose. I have kind of like two ideas, and we can go with whatever one you guys are more interested in. So the first just came from our conversation before, which is if you have not seen a custom multi-dropdown element built, that could be a really valuable thing to go over, just like how to build a completely custom select box element where you can select multiple things, and you can completely design it how you want. So that's one option. And then the other option that I've been just personally super passionate about recently is taking a look at blockchain on Bubble in terms of like just how to incorporate blockchain, NFTs, that whole kind of world, and how we can kind of capitalize on that next generation internet phenomenon, which has been something I've been pretty passionate about recently.
I feel like that's a 12-session series.
There's a lot that goes into that for sure.
4-hour builds with no sleep and a carton of Red Bulls kind of project.
It's a hackathon.
Yeah.
So multi-dropdown?
We're all totally around for.
Hell yeah, multi-dropdown.
All right, let's take a look at a multi-dropdown then. So come in here, custom multi-dropdown. All right, so this stuff is really fun. You could go a number of different directions with this. So what I'm going to do is just kind of start building, and then if anyone has questions as we go, like feel free to stop me and redirect me, or hey, what about this functionality? Because there's a lot that can go into this, and how much you want to build depends on your actual use case. So in general, I always start these with like an input element. And this is going to kind of serve as our main like dropdown. Now, even though it's not a dropdown, it's an input, it's going to hold basically a text value. But we'll be able to use the initial content of this input to basically set data so that when we click something in the dropdown list, it sets it in this input and it appears as though we've just selected something in the dropdown. So the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of get some aesthetics going here. I want this to look like a dropdown, and one thing it's missing is a little icon over here. And we'll make it the little down arrow like that. And just because I have a little bit of aesthetic OCD, I want that to be, gray. Let's remove the style. Let's make it, here we go. Okay, so we have our little down arrow there. All right. Underneath this now, when we click this, we need to show some sort of list of options. And so this is where our repeating loop is going to come into play. So down here, so let's say for ease of use, let's find some data that we have a good amount of data for. I have reviews, create more users, and months. Let's do months. seems easiest. We'll do it with drop down of months here. And we'll be able to select multiple. So I'm going to say that this is months, and this is all months. It's coming from our option set. So now we can do, let's do fixed number of cells because we know that this is going to be 12 months. It's easy enough. And then we'll get the data in there. So we'll do text, set it here. And this will be the current cells months display of the value. And then let's center that horizontally. So it appears in the center of the dropdown. This is looking a little tight. So I want to get a little more space in each column. And then we can center that vertically. Okay. And then the next thing we need to do is make this, so if we preview it right now, this is just always going to be visible and it's not very nice looking. So what we want to do is make this only visible when we actually click on the drop-down element. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm actually going to group these into a group because I want it to happen whether I click on the arrow or on the input itself. So I'm going to set the workflow on this group. I'm going to call this group input plus arrow, right? And I'm going to say when we click on this group, set the state of, I'm not going to use the page. Let's use the input. So I'm going to set the state of the input dropdown. We'll create a new state called open, and it'll be a yes or no state. And so I'll set the open to yes. And I want to make sure, always do this right away, otherwise you forget to set the default to no. So we're going to do that, but we're only going to do that. Let's see, let's go back to this workflow. We only want to set it to yes when it's no. And then we're going to copy that workflow. And when the open is yes, then we're going to set the value to no. Any questions so far? I'm assuming you guys are following me if I don't hear.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Okay, cool. So we just have this custom state now. And now we can group this repeating group in a group and use this as group RG visibility. We'll say that this is collapsed when hidden, not visible on page load. And that when the input dropdowns open is yes, then this element is visible. And let's just test out that functionality quick. There we go. Now, we also don't want this to be an actual input. We don't want to be able to type here. You could leave that. This opens up a whole other option. If you want your multi dropdown to be searchable, we could end up turning this into a search that narrows down our list. But for simplicity here, I'm going to make this disabled. Okay, so now we need to have selectability. I need to make it so that if I choose April, it sets the value here to include April. And again, we're trying to make a multi dropdown. So in an ideal world, I'd be able to select multiple different months. So what I'm going to do is move this back over to the left. And I'm actually going to put a checkbox in each cell to kind of determine whether or not that thing is going to be selected. So I have a little checkbox here. And because we already know what the thing is, I'm just going to delete the label so that it's just a checkbox. And we're going to have this checkbox selected. So now we can set up the functionality where when we click on something, we add it to some sort of custom state list, and then that becomes the value of our dropdown. So the next step is going to be to group this checkbox and the text here into a group. This will be, again, you'll notice I always do workflows on the groups. When you have multiple elements like that, you don't want a situation where someone has to click the month, but then if they don't click the checkbox, the workflow doesn't fire. You want it to fire no matter where they click in the row. So I'm going to put the workflow here. We're going to say that when we click on this, we are going to set the state. And now we need a list custom state. So I'm going to do input dropdown again. I'll store all my states here. And I'm going to create a active values list, which is just going to be a list of text values. Now I could actually do, let's do it this way. Let's do it as a list of months. So we actually want to store the option set values themselves there. Making sure to check that it's a list. That's great. Now, when you set a list state like this and you're only adding one item to the list, you guys may have seen this before, you may not have, but what we want to do is reference the existing state, right? So we're going to say the input dropdowns active value. So whatever that list currently is, if it's nothing, that's going to be nothing. And then we're going to do plus item. And then we're going to do the current cells months, right? Whatever one we just clicked. So if nothing's been clicked yet, this input active values is going to evaluate to an empty list. And then we're going to add the first item, which would be the current cells months. Then next time we do something, it'll reference whatever's already there and add the next one. Now, again, just like with these, we need our conditionals. So here, we're only going to add the item when the input dropdowns active values doesn't contain the current cell. Copy that workflow. If it does contain the current cell, then we're going to minus item. So now we have the ability to remove it as well, right? So we can now add the value or remove it from a custom state. Then we just want to make the checkbox dynamic and refer to the input dropdowns active values containing the current cells. I should say parent group month, right? And make sure that that's nesting the current cell. Are you guys familiar and comfortable with dynamic status for checkboxes? Like how you can do a true or false statement and that will make it a yes or no?
Yeah, but can we walk through it real quick? Is that okay?
Yeah, so basically with checkboxes, when I say dynamic, right, a checkbox is by default a yes or no value. So when I say dynamic, it's looking for a yes or a no. And so in order to determine whether this checkbox should be checked or unchecked, I'm entering a true or false statement. And if that statement is true, then this box will be checked. If that statement is false, then this box will be unchecked. So in this case, I'm saying if the custom state list contains this cell, then I want this to be checked, right? That will evaluate to yes. If it doesn't, if this evaluates to no, then this will be unchecked. Make sense? Cool. So so that should check the box. Let's check out where our functionality is at right now. This is the type of thing, as you build these types of custom features, just constantly be testing because you end up kind of forgetting. So here I can add a bunch of stuff. That's beautiful, right? Now, in theory, what we want is we want to see this list kind of appearing up here too. And then we want some way to be done so that we can close this and just have the values displayed in the dropdown, right? So what I'm going to do is underneath this, because this is a static 12, I can confidently put it here. If this was more of a dynamic list of things, I may end up putting this in the repeating group and then putting a condition on it where I say that it's only visible if the current cells index is, the last one. But in this case, because this is a set number of things, months, I can just put this down here. And I'm just going to put a done button. It's not even going to be a button. It's just going to be like a really subtle text. And so when I click done, all I want to do is set the state of input dropdowns open to no. Just want to close it. Now, up here in the input, this is where the initial content, we want to refer to that custom state. Input contents, active values. Now, because this is an input, I can't set a content format to be like months, right? It can only be one of the default bubble values. So this, we're going to have to take each item's display and have this turn into kind of a list of text. Now, bubble is a little, what you're going to notice if we go preview this now, it's not, there's still going to be a little bit of weirdness. Number one, the done button is there, which it shouldn't be. So we'll put a condition on that. And then two, if I do all this, you notice that it's not actually adding it here. And that's because initial content only applies, it's only the initial content. In this case, when we loaded the page, there was no initial content. There was no custom state. And so changing that after the fact isn't going to reset the initial content unless we reset the group that this input is in. So we need to reset data in this group input and arrow in order to get the content to display. So what I want to do is a couple things. Number one, I'm going to put a conditional on this done button. We're going to say it's not visible on page load. And when the input dropdown open is yes, then it's visible. And then the other thing we want to do is on the workflow to add something to the custom state. So when we actually do the plus item over here, when we're adding something, what we also want to do, actually we want to do this on both, but after we update that state, we want to reset data in group input and arrow. What that's going to do is refresh the initial content, right? And I want to do that as well when I remove something, because every time I change that state, I want my input to update. And then lastly, we want to do it when we click done too, so that no matter what, it's always an accurate reading of the custom state. Now, we go preview. July, April, February, June, click done, and they stay in there. So there is my multi dropdown. Now you could go in and format these values and make them look like little pills or tags or whatever you want, but that's kind of the basics of just using a repeating group and an input to kind of get your own custom dropdown functionality. And then from here, right, like after I click done, if I wanted to then save this data, right, so like save selected months to the database, all you have to do, like let's say on, again, just as an example, I grab user, excuse me, and I add a field that is a list of months. When I go to save this data, I'm basically just going to reference that custom state. So we can now set the list, the input dropdowns, active values. Make sense? Anyone have any questions?
This is fascinating, though.
You see so many design possibilities, Thomas.
I do.
I can hear your design brain working.
Yeah, you can take this. This was obviously like a very basic kind of rudimentary one, but there's a lot you can do here. I mean, you can create any type of dropdown you want, really.
Yep.
Cool.
What episode is
What's that?
What episode is this? Remind me.
This is 214.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I'll send you the recording after,
Okay, cool. Thank you.
because it won't play for like a week or something.
That's cool stuff, though.
Awesome.
Thank you guys for letting me join today. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for being here. We're going to move into after hours now. So after hours is what happens after office hours, when we turn off the recording and turn on the cameras and anything that isn't broadcast worthy. If there's something that we need to keep close to our chest, we can show the group and not the rest of the world. So if you want to see what's happening in after hours, you have to join. So go ahead and go to pronocoders.com, sign up for office hours as soon as possible, because we can't wait to meet you and see what you're building and help you answer your bubble questions. Thank you so much for